We'll get started in just a minute. Thank you for joining us, and I want to welcome everyone to the Chairish webinar series. Today's webinar is a design clinic with vintage fanatic, author, artist, and stylist Virginia Chamlee. And my name is Marissa Marcantonio, and I'm the Director of Trade Relations for Chairish. And Chairish is a marketplace, and with its acquisition of European marketplace Pomono, it is one of the largest home decor marketplaces in the world, and we have nearly 1 million pieces of the best in home decor. The Chairish and Pomono platform makes it easy to source the finest antique and vintage dealers, and also artisanal furniture makers and manufacturers that sell to top collectors, design enthusiasts, and interior designers. To share a bit about Chairish, it was founded in 2013 and is a marketplace of highly curated items ranging from furniture to art, decor, rugs, lighting, pillows, tabletop, and more. And I'd like to give a big welcome to our trade members. Trade members get access to that highly curated assortment of vintage, antique, and newly made pieces and items with net pricing, dedicated trade support, cashback rewards, and more. So if you aren't a member, I'd like to invite you to sign up today, and you can join at chairish.com/trade, or just leave a note in the comments and we can follow up with you. We will be recording this session, so we'll send out a link afterwards. And at the end, we're going to be doing a Q&A, so you can submit questions in the chat. So today I'm joined by first-time author, artist, and stylist Virginia Chamlee. The Florida-based vintage-loving collector is known for sharing her tips and tricks and savvy when buying vintage pieces. Virginia will take us through how to make a plan before venturing out to buy, how to shop smart, tips for breathing new life into pieces, and what to look for when hunting for finds. Then we'll dive deeper with her advice in a design clinic and get into her brand new book that just launched yesterday. Now, let's get started. Hi, Virginia. I'm so excited to talk to you, especially since your book just came out, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you first came to be interested in vintage furniture and collecting it.
So I have been shopping vintage since I was very young. It's something that I used to do with my grandmother who raised me. And, I'm sure it was sort of initially kicking and screaming when I was really young, right? You don't want to go to estate sales and live auctions and things like that. But as I got older and I got my first apartment and later my first house, that's sort of where I turned, to outfit my own home. I knew that I could find amazing pieces at vintage shops. I knew that they would often be more affordable than some of the new pieces. And I knew they would stand the test of time. And sort of counterintuitively, I think shopping vintage, you can actually find really on-trend pieces. And so that's what interested me. I'm a writer by trade. I write for People magazine, and I've written for a number of years. And so a couple of years ago, I just thought I should write a book about this. And like you said, it came out yesterday and is now available everywhere.
So what's interesting is, tell everybody what you cover, what your beat is when you write, because I think this is a really different direction, and I want to get into that in a little bit, but what do you typically cover?
So I typically write about politics for People magazine, which is, different than I think most outlets cover politics. I'm talking to people that work at the White House or people who have run for the presidency about, their day-to-day lives and sort of the more personal aspects. But, some of it sort of comes in handy. I mean, I think there's a bit of investigation that when it comes to vintage, you want to find out the provenance of something or find out who made something. And some of those journalism techniques, I think, actually lend themselves pretty well to vintage shopping.
Absolutely, they do. I totally agree with that. So first off, I love the name of the book. Why did you want to do a book, and what do you hope to share with your readers?
When I first started using Instagram specifically, which was really when Instagram first sort of came out, I was constantly sharing things that I found on Instagram. I think things that I found vintage shopping rather. And I was always getting questions from people like, how did you find this? How did you know what this is? And an equal amount of comments from people saying, you have great thrift stores. I don't have thrift stores like that, which I disagree because I think you can find this amazing stuff everywhere. And I guess at some point I just thought, gosh, someone should write a book about this and sort of answer these questions and offer a guide, on how to shop for vintage, what to do before you go out vintage shopping, what to do while you're vintage shopping, how to navigate all of the different avenues. And that's sort of how Big Thrift Energy was born.
So you're based in Florida, and I
Yeah.
think when people make that assumption that you have great stuff in your backyard, you do, because you have this wonderful resort style and old Florida vintage pieces that are really just all around you. But I think you can find great things anywhere. And as you're going to show, there are a lot of great tips on how to really look at pieces when you are sourcing and really getting a sense for what's out there. And then also a couple of trends. So
Yeah.
you love over the top style. Tell us about your maximalist side and why you're such a maximalist fan.
I think it's sort of the way I dress as well. I've always been interested in sort of artist made pieces, unique pieces, things that nobody else has. That's one of the reasons I love shopping vintage, because you can find so many things like that. And I just want my home to be really happy. It's something I write about in the book as well. I think it's so important to have confidence and realize that at the end of the day, it's your own home. So that for me, that makes me happy. So that's how I decorate my home.
So as a creative person, what I find so interesting, and I think a lot of our audience is going to find really fascinating too, because we have a lot of designers tuning in. You're very creative. You have artwork that you actually sell on Chairish. How did this start as an idea, and how did you know this could be a business?
Well, when I first started selling on Chairish, I was really just doing it to sort of offload pieces I had. And Chairish was kind of the only venue, where I knew people would appreciate it and buyers would be looking for some of the things that I had to sell. I wanted it to go to someone who really appreciated it. And over time, I just realized it started resonating with people. And kind of that's how I created my own art as well. I would be out on the hunt and I would think, gosh, I just wish I could find a painting that looked like this or that had these colors, because that would match with the table that I just found last week. And somewhere along the line, I thought, well, I guess I'll just create it. And that's how I kind of got started selling, and I just haven't stopped.
Amazing. So there are a couple of things that you're going to take us through. So in our next slide, we're going to talk about what do you need to think about as you prepare to source, and whether this means online or being out in the field. There are a couple of things that one should start thinking about to get a sense of how to approach this. So what are your big tips?
Yeah, so I have the entire book is sort of written in a linear fashion. And the beginning of the book is really all about what you should do before you even leave your house, before you even go to the thrift store or the flea market. I think getting inspired is a huge part of that. And that, it's research, but it's fun research. So I think Pinterest, going to the Chairish new arrivals page, looking at your Instagram saved images and getting an idea of what inspires you, so that when you go out on the hunt and you see those pieces, you remember, oh, hey, I saw something very similar to that. Similarly, I think it's a good idea to know both what you need and what you want. When you go out to a thrift store, for example, it's really hard to have a perfect XYZ list, because you're not necessarily going to find all of those things. But it's a good idea still to know what you need. So if it's a coffee table, for instance, have that in the back of your mind, but also sort of remain open to surprises, right? Because maybe you won't find a coffee table, but maybe you'll find a bench that would work as a coffee table, or an oversized ottoman that would function as a coffee table. And then, sort of my last tip on prepping is to stick to what speaks to you. I think there's a sense of overwhelm that comes with shopping vintage, and you run the risk of sort of piling everything you find into your cart. So I think it's always important to remember remember who you're buying for, whether it's you or if you're a designer and you're buying for a client, remember who that person is and what that aesthetic is, and let that sort of guide you on your journey.
Yes, I think that's great advice. I totally agree, because my first time going to Brimfield, the big antiques show in Massachusetts, I was constantly looking at different things and thinking, could I use this? Where would I put this? And I think having a sense of what you're mapping towards is really valuable. So, as you said, if it's a material that's guiding you, if it's a style that's guiding you, don't be so rigid in how you approach it, but be open. And
Absolutely.
That's where we get into style. So how can somebody really get in touch with that?
Yeah, I think it goes back also to the inspiration. If you have no idea what your style is and you start pulling images and drawing inspiration from other places, that's a really great opportunity to sort of define your style. If you follow a designer on Instagram, let's say it's Kelly Wersler, who really inspires you, you know that your aesthetic sort of matches hers. And then whenever she posts a new image, it's a great idea to go look at that and sort of see how she's defining that style and continually refining it. I also have in the book sort of some tips and tricks on defining your style and sort of some quiz-like things that I think we'll get into in a little bit. But I think it's a little bit about asking yourself questions. What kind of things do you like? Do you like pairs and symmetry? Maybe you're more traditional. Do you like a little bit of everything? Maybe you're maximalist like me. And I think sort of defining loosely what your style is, because style can evolve over time, I think will really help guide you as well.
We've all bought things where a few years later, we might say, gosh, I'm really not as enamored with that piece as I once was. And we're living in a fascinating time because anything goes.
Yes.
Things that you love go together. And I think that that's a really nice thing to remember, that this is a fluid process. It's not set in stone.
Absolutely. And I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day. I don't think your living room has to be styled in a day. And the fun thing about vintage shopping is you can collect as you go. And so you can add things years and months down the line, and your style can sort of change too. I mean, we all change, our habits change, our likes and interests change. So I don't think just because, you're boho one year, you don't have to be the next.
Absolutely. So with so many periods and styles sort of commingling now, what are some things to bear in mind as you start to approach the landscape if you don't yet know what you're really feeling you want?
Yeah, so I think this is the page in my book that I was referencing earlier, and it's sort of meant to be like a BuzzFeed style quiz to get you acquainted with what your style is, and questions to ask yourself. But I think it's just like you mentioned, sometimes we buy things that we later say that we don't like. And for me, certainly when I was starting out, that would happen more frequently than not. And I think that's because I didn't totally know who I was yet or what my aesthetic was. And I think as I've gotten older and as I've sort of matured and grown in my curation, I've learned that editing down is almost as important as just buying in general. So I think having that confidence to know what your style is, so that when you go out, you're not going to pull things that you'll regret later. I think that's a skill, and it's just one that comes with time.
It sort of gives you a North Star.
Yes, so, exactly.
One of my favorite stories in your book is about a piece that you scored for a song. So in our next slide, we share a couple of your favorite finds over time. Tell us about some pieces that you have come across and purchased that were just real, like, wow moments where you could not believe your luck.
So the Goyard trunk is, I think, the one you're referencing. Yep. That was just, a crazy find. I found that at a little antique store. It was called like Old Wicker. The store doesn't exist anymore, sadly. But my grandmother and I were leaving an estate sale, and we saw this sign on the side of the road that said Old Wicker. we were stuck in traffic, so we stopped in and we didn't see anything in the store, but the shopkeeper said, make sure you check out the shed out back because I have more merchandise there. And in the shed, there was this insane trunk, and I recognized the logo immediately. I gasped audibly. And then I noticed the tag said old trunk, $90. And
What?
I mean, I thought this can't be real, right? Like maybe it's fake, but even if it was fake, it was incredible. So I brought it home. I did more research and I eventually had it authenticated, and it is the real deal. Like I said, the store doesn't exist anymore. So I joke that it was like a figment of my imagination, because when you go back there now, it's like a beer store. Like maybe this, I entered some
Maybe it was a mirage.
Yeah, I somehow found this trunk. But yeah, that was definitely the best find in terms of value. And just, I mean, Goyard is such a rare brand to find anyway. But I also love finding even like no name art, you know, really fun abstract pieces that aren't necessarily valuable in the sense that they were made by anyone important, but they're just pieces that speak to me. These brass chairs, they're mastercraft. That was a great find. I got those at a Salvation Army outside of Orlando. And the really fun thing about that find was there were, I think, 3 or 4 other pieces in the store that I really wanted, but I only had room for one. And I mean, it was amazing stuff. There was a Brutalist Lane armoire in there that I could have brought home. So I made the choice for these gold chairs because I had never seen anything like them. But yeah, I have found all sorts of amazing things over the years.
I have a painting like that too, where I found it and it's this octagonal piece that is just a riot of color, and it's a graphic geometric pattern. And it's not something that is a particularly important piece, but I just gravitated towards it because of the color. And I said, I have to have this. So when I went back to the dealer and they had it months and months later, I said, this is a sign I have to have this. So getting it home is a process because of its shape and size, but a giant piece of art can just be so rewarding to have something that you love that you see every day.
Yeah. And it probably made you appreciate it that much more because it took you was such a struggle to get it home.
Exactly. There's a thing called the IKEA effect, which it's this phenomenon where if you are invested in putting something together and building something, you're more attached to it and less likely to get rid of it. So I feel like that definitely comes into play with our vintage things that we love, where we just see them and, you know, they speak to us for some reason or another, and that's it, right? And that's why having a roadmap is so important. Otherwise, we'd end up buying everything.
Right. These pieces haunt us.
It's true. So there are a lot of vintage makers that people know, but there are others that are sort of being recognized. Again, take us through some of the names that people should know, and then a few that maybe people are not as aware of.
Yeah, so I think some of the names, particularly here on this list, people are probably familiar with, but they maybe don't know the story behind it. I write a little bit about Lee Reynolds, for instance, Lee Reynolds Burr was an artist in Chicago who wanted to make oil paintings affordable for the masses. So he created sort of a consortium of artists. And I have found many of these paintings out in the wild. And the reason for that is he did not paint them all. Basically, other people were painting them and signing his name. There is actually, though, a secondary market for these paintings. And some of them are really on trend. I mean, there are several that they're almost all very large in scale. They tend to be abstract. And some of them are just really cool. And they look like, you know, something that people are gravitating towards now. Maitland Smith is another one that I think, you know, it's a brand that still continues to this day, and they still make things. But in the 80s and 90s, they were doing so much with tessellated stone. So really beautiful sculptural pedestals and boxes and interesting shapes. And that to me feels very now. And it's a look that kind of resonates today.
I love their accessories. They're,
I mean, amazing.
Beautifully detailed and rendered. And the materials, as you mentioned, the mixed materials, I think, are really what set it apart.
Yeah, totally. I think some other brands that are not on this list that I love and I think are still resonating today, John Dickinson, you know, all of the sort of draped plaster pieces, that's having such a moment and really has been having a moment for several years. And that's the kind of thing, you know, maybe you can't necessarily find a John Dickinson piece at the thrift store, but he inspired other artisans. And so it is possible to find his work or similar work at the thrift store.
Yeah, and if you love trompe l'oeil pieces, that is something that you can also sort of take in a new direction. And it could be a lamp that has those folded pleats, or it could be a console. I mean, there are other ways to find that materiality in different applications. So I think that staying open notion is a really good one to keep in mind when on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another tip is always be looking. So how do you approach shop often, stock often?
So, I mean, I get asked constantly what my favorite thrift store is, and it's such a boring answer that no one wants to hear. But the truth is, I just think you have to go all the time. And that goes for estate sales and antique malls and even marketplaces like Chairish. I mean, you have to be looking all the time to find the good stuff, because if it's something really good, it is going to get snatched up. And that's what I mean by stock often. I think it's easier now to do with social media. There are thrift stores and antique malls and local dealers who have a social media presence, and they'll often take to Instagram or Facebook to share their merchandise before it's actually on the floor. And, you know, similarly with Chairish, going to those new arrivals and sort of looking at them throughout the day or throughout the week, I think is such a good idea, not just to know what's available, but especially with Chairish, because the team does such a good job curating it, to get an idea for what the trends are and sort of the direction we're heading in aesthetically.
That's one of my favorite things, is you can sort of suss out what's on the cusp just by a new inventory. And you can sort of put a story together of what is about to really break through and bubble up. And it's cyclical with trends and with pieces coming back into fashion. And it's really something where that pace has sped up, which is fascinating to me. I feel like we're always on the hunt for that next big thing.
Absolutely.
So now we're going to get into design dilemmas. And so our first one is, how do you discover what you gravitate towards? So this is a picture of your living room, and it's such a reflection of you. I mean, there's so many different styles living together here. So how did you come to this place where this palette felt right, and the materials and the textures and the colors and the shapes worked together? How did you arrive here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I clearly have a thing for checkerboard, which you can tell
Having a moment
behind me, and the spine of my book is checkerboard. So I think the biggest thing for me is a lot of this was collected over time, right? And some of it was new. I mean, that lamp in the corner, which I got for $1.50, by the way, at a virtual auction rather. That was a newer piece. It was done in the 1970s, but newer for me. So a lot of the way I discovered my aesthetic is just by thinking of what I'm drawn to and sort of, you know, I love to be inspired by trends, but not completely driven by them. And I think it's important to be cognizant of them and know what's going on, but you don't necessarily have to throw out all your stuff and only buy what's trending. I think there are ways to sort of incorporate it into your current pieces. So for instance, here in this photo, almost everything here is old. The media console is IKEA. So there's the IKEA effect in practice. And then that little stool, that's sort of checkerboard, that tiny pedestal rather, that's a new piece as well. So I think it's just all about, you know, going with the flow, allowing yourself to be influenced by trends, but sort of being confident and sticking to what's you at the end of the day.
For our next design dilemma, this is a wonderful collage from your book where you're just sort of concepting a mood and a feeling. So I feel like this is something that we have touched on, but this is a great exercise to come up with how those things can live together.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, as you can see here, I mean, some of this, there's a coffee filter pictured here and just clippings from magazines and art books. And it doesn't, you know, you don't have to be inspired by furniture. Even if you're shopping for furniture, you can be inspired by patterns and prints and textures. So I agree with you. I think that's so important. I think when it comes to mixing different styles, it's important to always have balance and always have tension as well. For so long in design, we've been really obsessed with pairs and buying, a full bedroom set. And I think we've moved away from that, thankfully, because I think we're all happier for it. But I think it's important to find some sort of through line. So maybe if you have two lamps next to your bed and they're totally different, they should have something in common, whether it's the line or the shape or the color, something that allows them to sort of mix well together and live harmoniously and have a conversation. I mean, I think the pieces if they're all in one room together, they should look like they could all be friends, and they would all sort of hang out if they came to life.
And that's something that I loved learning styling over the years and working with photographers is with this arranging of pieces, really having that overlap in areas or things that are separated. And for getting that perfect shot, that's not necessarily how we live every day,
right?
But it's creating this dichotomy of, push pull and having different shapes and silhouettes. And I mean, I love the idea of mixing and matching something where they may just be related by color or material. I think that there's so much freedom there to really just riff off of what, you think is working. There's no strict playbook.
Definitely.
So this is one of my favorite moments that you share, and so good to get your take on this because you do see so much and you do interact with so many pieces. So where can you go big and where should you hold back? What are some pieces that you feel you should really go big on?
Yeah, so I think conventional wisdom will tell you to splurge on big pieces that you'll use all the time and sort of save on the accessories. I tend to go the opposite direction. I mean, I think you should splurge on those really major moments. And for me, that tends to be art, that tends to be accessories, even like an amazing vase or a lamp. I think those are splurge worthy moments. And also, I will often splurge and save on the same piece. That's something I do a lot. I write about in my book as well. And by that, I mean upholstery. So with chairs, for instance, I have a really big thing for chairs. I can't say no to them. And I have found some really amazing ones for pennies, literally. I mean, I have one in the book that is very low, angular. It's just like the coolest shape ever. It was $9.99 at Goodwill. And that's because it was covered in bright orange corduroy and it looked terrible and it had been there for weeks. Nobody wanted it, but I saw it and I thought, oh, this could be amazing with the right fabric. So I had it recovered. I bought new fabric. I had a custom bolster made for the back of it. So at the end of the day, I did splurge on it. I mean, I spent the same amount as I would have had I bought a new chair, but I had a totally customizable piece. I mean, that nobody else has. So I think there are ways you can sort of splurge and save on the same items and also just splurge on what makes you happy. If you can't stop thinking about it, especially with vintage, it tends to be snatched up and then you never see it again. So I always say, go for it.
Yeah. And it's about that piece that has potential, right? So if a piece has good bones, meaning the frame is a shape that you like, the scale is something that you like, you feel as though it can be rehabbed and reupholstered to bring it a second life, that's such a great opportunity to make it yours and make it unique. And as you said, one of a kind. When it's gone, it's gone. So it's worth grabbing it.
Yes.
So this is a hard one. When should you say no and walk away? We've all bought something that we don't like post-purchase. Maybe it's something that we just didn't think enough about and consider it, or we just had to have it. So when should you just turn on your heel and say, no, not good?
I think the two biggies for me are if it can't be rehabbed, if it's broken beyond repair, or if you're not going to repair it. I mean, I know I just went into upholstery But if it's an amazing piece that I know I'll get reupholstered and I know is like a shape that I've never seen, that's one thing. If it's a leather couch and it's amazing, but it's ripped and I would have to get all new leather and that's probably a no for me. The other thing is if it's outside of your budget. And that's, I think, something really important to talk about when it comes to estate sales or auctions, because I am a very competitive person. If I want something, I want it. And it's really hard for me to tell myself no. And especially in an auction, I want to win just to win. So I've really gotten better at telling myself.
I didn't say that, but I was going to say, in case you didn't want someone else to have it and you knew you would buy it, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, I have been guilty of it. And it's similar with an estate sale, right? If you go on the first day and you see someone else eyeing something, sometimes I have a tendency to say, okay, I'm getting that because I'm worried that the other person will get it. I think it's good to sort of pace yourself and know that, I mean, even if it's something amazing, you'll find something else amazing. That's sort of the beauty of vintage shopping.
It's totally a circular thing.
Yes.
So you also had some great advice that I know we discussed around glass. If a table has a glass top that's chipped or broken, say no.
Yeah, say no. And I mean, a table, I guess you could get new glass cut or marble or something if it's like a great base and you're buying it because of the base, that might be different. But if it's, a fully glass piece that's, I would say pass on that, even if it's really affordable. I think sometimes we run into problems with the sort of cheap thrills because we think, well, I have to buy this, it's $10, but
and then it's so much extra work that it ends up sitting in the corner collecting dust when you just don't have time to get around to it.
Exactly.
So everything is circular and the pendulum always swings back with styles and trends. From what you're seeing, what is the next big thing? What should we all be collecting now?
Yeah. So I think, obviously I'm a maximalist and a lot of the pictures in the book are sort of my style in recent years. I love bright colors, but I really love the trend we're seeing towards more browns and sort of rich greens and reds. I just redid my kitchen and I used a lot of brown there. Dark woods, I think, are sort of taking over where we were seeing a little more light. And like you said, everything is circular. So it's kind of interesting when you look at trends now, you can see where they came from. I think metal is also having a moment. Metal sconces, metal lampshades, that's sort of taking the place of brass. I mean, brass was huge for a while and that sort of evolved to metal. I think when it comes to art, surrealism is really big right now. We're seeing that in furniture as well. So chairs that are shaped like a hand. I have some of those in my book. I know Chairish has some of the lip sofas that are very Dolly-esque.
Totally.
I think, so I think those are all things that I'm personally very excited about.
And I think during this time, people want an escape and want to embrace something that's lighter and more fun. And that's why I think surrealism is having a moment, because it is wacky and wild and wonderful and it's unexpected. And I think throwing something in a room that you don't expect to see there gives it this wonderful added element.
Yeah. I mean, we've lived through this very surreal moment in time, I think, with the pandemic too. So we all just kind of want that escapism, like you said.
Completely. So that takes us through the, we've got one more. What are some gems that you just think have not been appreciated yet that are out there?
So, I mean, I think one of the biggest hidden gems I like to look for, especially when I go to a thrift store or estate sale, are lighting fixtures. I think that's a great thing to look for. I think art in general is great, particularly because that's so difficult to find. So if you find something at a vintage store, it's a good thing to look for. And sculpture, I think that's something that I am really interested in at the moment and something that's a hidden gem, particularly because antique stores and thrift stores and even estate sale companies don't always know what a sculpture is, so they might not display it correctly, or they might just sort of stick it in a pile of other things. So that to me is a great way to sort of shop, to like sift through everything, to take everything out and view it on its own, so you can get an idea for what it is. And I think sculpture is a really great thing to look for, because it would be so expensive and difficult to find elsewhere.
And that's where doing research can really be key. So there's so many ways that you can brush up and learn about the history of styles and art history and decorative objects, that you can really go and educated and knowledgeable, especially if you're passionate about something. There's so much that you can learn. So when you go out in the field, you do have a basis for comparison. And even though something isn't signed or named, you can maybe see that it's in the style of or in the manner of, and it resonates. So I think that it's so fun what's out there now to sort of be a guide in that way.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Okay, so that wraps up our design dilemmas. And now we're going to open it up for questions. So I'm just going to take a look here and see what we got in the Q&A. Oh, I love this. What have you not found that you're still hunting for?
A Birkin bag. That's
I mean,
I found the trunk. So, one thing that it's kind of a silly thing. I love David Hockney. I don't expect to find a David Hockney in the wild, although I think it's probably been done. But so I would love to find like a Hockney poster of a work that I like. And posters can have actually some value on the secondary market as well. And Chairish does a great job with framed posters, sort of merchandising them well with other items. So I think that's something. I love art posters and I love art. So Hockney poster and a Birkin.
Someone did find a Hockney recently. I think it was a screen that he painted that was analyzed, and they discovered it was actually indeed a Hockney. So I'm going to keep the faith for you.
Great. Thank you.
So the next question, you get to explore the best markets and shows all over the country. What would you say different regions are that are best for certain things? So where should you go to find certain items?
Yeah, so obviously Florida, as you discussed early on, is great for sort of that Hollywood Regency, that rattan, bamboo. I mean, that's kind of the lifestyle. Palm Springs in California is similar. If you go to the thrift stores there, the estate sales. I think Detroit and Michigan, the sort of greater Detroit area, is amazing for mid-century. You can kind of work backwards, right? So if you're visiting a new town, sort of look into the history of that town and when it became big, so Detroit, obviously the auto industry was big. And so that made it sort of boom town in the mid-century. So when you go to Detroit, you should go to estate sales, because there's amazing mid-century art and furniture. I also have a tip in the book about when you travel and you're near an art school. I think that is a great place to go shopping at the thrift store, because the artists donate their, half done canvases or maybe pieces they weren't happy with, but you might.
That's a great idea. You're in a creative area, so you're going to find some of that.
Yeah.
So now the next question, we did touch on this, but it's worth asking because I know you share other resources in your book. How do you know how to identify what something is if it's really out there?
Yeah, I have a section in my book on some different online resources. Obviously, Chairish is one of those. I think if you just sort of get the knack of keywords, then you can sometimes do enough research that even if something's not signed, you can figure out what it is, or at least what era it was from. That's another thing with art. If you find a canvas, and sometimes there's different fonts used on it, and that can help you determine, when it was made, by when the canvas was created, for instance. And there are all sorts of forums as well, depending on what it is. I mean, there are forums for jewelry, there are forums for, different types of porcelain. So I think if you do research and just find those forums, there are some avenues to sort of post photos and ask the masses or ask people who might be more knowledgeable than you. And if worse comes to worse, I mean, I think Instagram or Facebook is a great place to just sort of shoot a quick picture and ask, does anyone know what this is?
And chances are someone's going to have information about a style or period. There's people that love so many different things really,
Right.
really passionately that you're going to find your people. You're going to find
Yeah.
someone that has that information to share. Well, that was great. That was super interesting. And thank you. So that concludes our webinar. And I want to thank you, Virginia, for joining us today.
You so much.
And we will be sending out a link to the recording. So thanks again, Virginia. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
We look forward to seeing you again for our next Chairish webinar. Thank you.